in spite of a very high level of safety, as was recalled yesterday, accidents can still happen. Each time a safety investigation is conducted to determine the root cause of the accident and then learn lessons in safety terms, we are lucky to have with us Jean-Paul Troadec, former director of the Office for Investigations and Analysis for Civil Aviation, the French BEA, to explain us how this is all happening. There was a French movie called Boîte Noire, Black Box, that is really good. Do watch it. And I mean, Pierre Ninet, if you know this French actor, he's good looking, isn't he? So anyway, you're our Pierre Ninet for the day. And so that is anecdotal. There was a love story in this movie. But apart from that, our investigations conducted that way technically. Well, technically, this is a quite accurate movie. Of course, you may wonder why the chief investigator is so corrupt, but that's, I mean, the dramatic aspect of the movie, but otherwise it's a good documentary. Well, I'll let you explain how it's all done. You've got a few slides ready for us. How is that done concretely? What does the BEA do? Well, I'm particularly happy to speak in front of this audience. Some of you may be faced with one of the investigations led by the BEA or its counterparts for other means of transport. The title of my talk is The Aviation Safety Investigation When All Other Prevention Measures Have Failed, because this is only then that the safety investigation is conducted. So I should say a few words about how prevention is organized in civil aviation. A few words about the entities that are involved in aviation safety. The first one, first there's regulation, which is the result of European regulations now managed by the European Union Aviation Safety Agency, headquartered in Cologne, which sets regulations and certifies aircraft. At a lower level, at a national level, we've got National Aviation Safety Authorities, DGAC in France, that mostly checks operators and is mostly there for national monitoring of aviation activities. Meanwhile, manufacturers design planes and comply with safety standards that are set by the European agency, and they make sure that the individual manufacturing of each aircraft complies with what was approved. And then at the end of the chain, this is the role of operators, airlines, air navigation, safe services, and airports to train their staff to define operating procedures and on a day-to-day basis to ensure safety for their operations. This is a dynamic system in which these various stakeholders have a dialogue together. They analyze all events until such time as, well, in the case of the most severe events, you need to call on an outside body that is going to carry out a safety investigation. In France, this role is entrusted to the BEA, the Investigation and Analysis Office for Civil Aviation. The status of BEA complies with that of European investigation offices. Right now, there's been harmonization in terms of investigations, not just at the global level, but especially at the European level. There's a European regulation that created that regulation, is in keeping with international civil aviation rules. It enshrines the authority of investigative bodies and that there is a network of authorities. That's very important because experience garnered by one of the offices is shared with all offices, and it also organizes cooperation between investigative offices, and it also organizes exchange of information, not just between investigative offices, but throughout the aviation system, especially with national and European authorities that have a specific role to play and which can also be involved in accidents via their actions. The scope of action of the BEA, here I'm speaking about the French BEA. Its role is to lead investigations for severe accidents and incidents that happened on the French territory and in territorial waters very close to the shores, and for aircraft registered in France or in international waters. I'll come back to the Rio-Paris air flight that occurred in international waters. Well, there has to be an authority that steps in to investigate, and this investigation falls on the office of the registration country of the aircraft. So how many investigations a year? I'll come back to that later, but in practice we're involved in about 300 investigations. Half of them investigations led by itself, because the accidents happened on the French territory or in French territorial waters, and we're involved in 150 investigations roughly led by other international authorities to which the BEA is associated, because the accident involved a French registered aircraft, if it's for instance a French airline, or a plane that was certified in France. All Airbuses, ATMs and helicopters are considered as being certified in France. And so that gives the BEA quite wide responsibilities. Therefore, the BEA is not just the biggest investigative officer in Europe, but it's the second largest in the world, behind the US NTSB.
Alors.
Right, and now a few words about the status of the French BEA. It is a national agency working under the General Department for the Environment. In fact, we are supposed to be impartial and we must be exempt from any kind of influence, and so therefore we could not come under the French DGAC, the Civil Aviation Authority, because it is a party to safety issues. So we decided to work with a general department that ensures that we have full independence and impartiality. In administrative terms, well, we're not a government agency as such, like the nuclear safety authority, but we are, because of our administrative status, we know we are fully independent and indeed impartial. Now, regarding the investigations carried by our office and by the Justice Department, the safety investigations' purpose is to improve safety and to prevent future accidents. And it's not a matter of apportioning blame or responsibility. Now, when you read an accident report, well, you can draw conclusions from that. You can infer who is responsible, but you've got to be careful, because when our office makes recommendations, these can be very broad recommendations and beyond the specific accident or specific investigation. So it's not as if we were pointing a finger at this or that party involved in the accident. And that's also a matter of independence or impartiality. The BEA office will receive instructions from no government agency or indeed anybody who's where this could cause a conflict of interest. So that is actually statutory, and so it's been perfectly respected, even if at times, well, it is a bit of a balancing act, because during the Rio-Paris accident, you had, of course, a big involvement of the political stage, and that's difficult sometimes to address. We conduct our investigation independently, and we are the only body that can provide information, but needless to say, you can well imagine that the political authorities have relations with the victims and such like, and that's not our brief. But regarding the accident itself, we're the only body that is entitled to comment, and otherwise, I mean, anybody else making inappropriate comments would really be out of place. But it's very seldom happened at all. But back to where we are, when there are victims in a plane accident, well, inevitably there will be a judicial inquiry, and that inquiry conducted by judicial experts working under the authority of an investigative magistrate will, of course, refer to the technical investigation conducted by BE, and so therefore we need to coordinate the two investigations, and so access to the site of the accident, that site must be protected. Usually the place is secured by the French law enforcement authorities. You can have well, access, not just protection to the site, but access to the site, because in the past it may have happened in other countries where the Justice Department kept technical items for itself and didn't pass it on to the technical investigators. No, the two teams of investigators must have a dialogue, must share information, and sometimes there are disputes and issues, say, of funding can arise. Well, anyway, relations between the investigating magistrate and the head of BEA, relations are governed by a working protocol. It only dates back to 2014, meaning that before that time, in the past, there may have been, difficulties arising in the relations between the two teams, investigation teams. Now, this is a sort of a theoretical setting, but let's look at the practical example, which I myself was involved in, and that was the Rio-Paris air crash. All the provisions I mentioned were implemented as part of this investigation. So that plane crashed into 4,000 meters of water in the Atlantic Ocean in July 2009, and access to the wreck took about 2 years. It was a very complicated operation to access that wreck. The plane fell in international waters. On the right-hand side, you can see a little circle. Where am I? Sorry, I was pointing. I'm not familiar with the operation of this device. Yes, no, you had the wrong remote control. So we'll go back to your slide. Which one was it? Where? Sorry, we'll just take a second. Right. And so you can point to, yes, this arrow. Right, that circle. You have a rock island, which it's called St. Peter and Paul, which is off the shores of Brazil, belongs to Brazil, but it is in international waters, and so BEA was in charge of the investigation. It was a French aircraft, but in international waters. A few minutes earlier, the plane flew over that island, and if the island had fallen near this islet in international or indeed Brazilian waters, then, of course, the accident or the investigation would have been conducted by the Brazilian authorities. I have every confidence in these Brazilian authorities, but it would have made things a bit more complicated. Right then, so the investigation was entrusted to BEA, and we had to define our relations with the Justice Department. So there were a number of protocols regarding investigations at sea and search operations. You can have two teams doing the job, so it was for BEA to actually do the physical work and passing on information to the judicial authority. Now, the operation was very costly indeed. Investigations are funded by the states in charge of the investigation, so the insurance doesn't come into it, as far as I know. And so this was financed by the French government, but there were also a contribution from both Air France and Airbus, but the Justice Department didn't provide any direct funding. The priority was to fish parts of the aircraft from the bottom of the sea, and we had to decide which was priority. Of course, the black boxes were the number one priority, but once that was retrieved, we had to ensure that the contents of these black boxes should be preserved. And in the past, the BEA was accused of tampering with the information in these black boxes. It was untrue, but there was a suspicion, and to avoid any such suspicion in the future, we made sure that the black box should be escorted by a law enforcement officer on the boat all the way from the wreck to the lab on shore. And of course, the most delicate operation was to retrieve and lift the bodies out of the seabed. And you can imagine that didn't come under the responsibility of BEA, but BEA organized it all. And it was for the National Gendarmerie, the Law Enforcement Administration, to cover responsibility for that. Anyway, regarding this accident, the report, the investigation report, produced a number of recommendations for the various authorities, the Civil Aviation, the International Civil Aviation Organization, regarding rescue at sea. I believe that this afternoon there will be a discussion on the rescue of ships, but you also have aircraft falling in the sea, and that is for the state in charge of the area. That's the SAR area. In this case, it happened to be Brazil, but there were difficulties, and that led the BA to make recommendations. The European agency, the certification of Pitot probes that can tell you about the loss of speed of the aircraft, the French Civil Aviation Authority for the monitoring of airlines, the specific modalities for Airbus, should there be indications of loss of speeds, and the airlines for the training of the crews. So you can see that in this specific case, all the stakeholders involved in air safety were given recommendations by the BEA. I'll conclude by citing the other investigating officers, because, of course, if you want to achieve any success in terms of air safety, you need to have prevention and safety investigations. But because we were successful in this field, others followed suit. So this is for aircraft, but there's a similar thing for sea-going ships. So you don't have the same international agreements, but there's one for ground transportation, so and another one for industrial risks. And even the military have taken up the model, and so they have their own investigation officers for accidents involving military ships or planes. Right, well, thank you. We have about a minute to go, and referring to this recent Air India tragedy. We haven't retrieved the black boxes, but you've read the media, I guess. You will tell me that this is not your brief, but have you got any inkling as to what may have happened? Well, what I can tell you, it is for the Indian authorities to conduct the investigation. They are working in cooperation with the Americans because this was an American design built, but also the British because they were British nationals on board, but they have also agreements with the British authorities. Regarding possible leads, it's not for me to comment, it's for the Indian authorities. Having said that, the black boxes were retrieved and analyzed. I hope they were not too damaged. They should have resisted the impact. There were lots of recordings. There was these terrible pictures of the plane crashing down. There were also communications between ground control and the pilot. And then all sorts of other items. I believe that investigators have a pretty clear idea of what happened, and I can only hope that they will communicate on this pretty soon. But at this stage, I'm not in a position to make the slightest hypothesis. All right, well, thank you, sir.
Alors c'est maintenant l'heure du déjeuner, vous le savez. Aujourd'hui c'est sous forme de cocktail. Je vous invite donc à aller aux différents spots et vous pouvez à nouveau avoir le profit, le bénéfice de ce joli jardin. Et on reprend bien évidemment à 14h30 précise. Merci Pascal.
Jean-Paul, merci beaucoup.
Ça a été ? Bon. En tout cas, j'ai tenu.
Love makes us, love invents us. Love turns us inside out, inside out.